Hi, welcome to this episode of Hollywood Breaks. It's good to be with you today. This afternoon, we interviewed Richard Rushfield, the editor-in-chief of the Anchor magazine, which is the most feared newsletter in Hollywood. And Richard and we discussed what's really happening in Hollywood when it comes to the distribution game, but kind of asking the question, like, who's to blame? I want to know specifically, does it have to do with marketing? Is it the filmmakers, or is it just the way we're making money? So, of course, we always wanted to end with a happy ending, and you can wait to the end and see how we ended on a happy ending. But all is great, and it's good to be with you today. So welcome to Hollywood Breaks. Since Richard has been here last, there's some things have changed. But a little bit. Keith, we were talking before this just about what's going to actually get people into the theaters. Is it going to be, what were the three themes that you had there? Superhero movies, scary movies.
Yeah, and then sci-fi has kind of come in because of Dune, which is arguably a success or not a success depending on the metrics. But you could kind of loop some sort of action sci-fi into one bucket. And the idea is, are those really the only films left that are going to drive people to the theaters? Because given the last few months, that seems to be the case. Those are the only movies that are really convincing people to show up. And that to me is not great for the state of the industry, but I'm trying to be an optimistic here, but it's been tough the last few months.
What's your take, Richard? Are people gonna get back in the theaters with Dune, The Eternals, and what's the scary movie that's out right now?
Halloween.
Somewhat. It's so the rules seem to be right now, as much we're building new rules, that nothing works except for these big 4-quadrant tent poles, and those don't work well enough to actually be a viable business. So that's kind of where we are. They
don't work because it costs too much money to make them, and we're not sure it's going to make money in the theaters.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. They're even the ones that are. We haven't had anything make like $1.5 billion or right. So they're all kind of like, the ones that are doing best would have been middling to bad 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the ceiling. So how is that a business? Is what you have got to ask.
But isn't it because the studio though is counting different numbers than box office numbers, right? So I totally agree with you. If we're looking at a $60 million opening weekend for a superhero movie, that's horrendous for a superhero movie based on any other standard. What we don't have visibility is if we take away the box office number alone, the OTT platforms, which have also grown in the last 2 years, and we don't have that understanding really what the offset is of those two numbers. But that we're hoping that the platform play is the new business when they're losing money on the theatrical side.
So I guess you get it into the idea that what it always was, and we just didn't look at this way, that for a company like Disney, the big giant tentpoles were loss leaders for a whole bunch of downstream revenue, and toys and rides and cruise ships and everything else, and licensing. And now, I guess you can throw in the streaming services as part of that, but you kind of started that with okay, but the movies will at least sort of break even more or less when everything's counted at the box office. So you're not starting out taking a $300 million bath, and there's just no way that new subscription revenues add up to $300 million unless you're.
Yeah, but they're basically aren't they making 100 million subscribers at $20 a month is $2 billion a month off of those platforms, right? So they don't need the theatrical to release to generate that. They're basically getting the equivalent of $2 billion theatrical release every single month on their OTT platforms. Right. And that downstream stuff, I always wonder how that works. I'm glad you're talking about this because it really, like, there is a funny part of how this is really going to play itself out. And right now, I feel like the $1.5 trillion deficit that Biden just passed for us has the movie theaters in there somewhere. Like I'm guessing that there's got to be the studios are saying, "Cool, give us $500 billion, and we'll keep on worrying about our OTT platform instead of movie theaters."
Yeah, but I mean, unless they're going to be movie theaters are going to be a subsidized industry for eternally. So if you go to a world where 4 years ago you had 7 studios that were churning out 20 to 25 releases plus a bunch of independent things. So you had 150, 200 movies a year coming their way to theaters. I don't actually know how to add or subtract. So
yeah, we're running with it.
We're in the entertainment industry. We're not supposed to know math.
Yeah.
I just write about business. I don't.
Yeah. We'll let the people with the comments give us the real numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
But so if you change that to there's say 4 studios in the theatrical business, and then they'll just release 8 movies a year. So that's I think that's 32 is the number.
Yes.
So that's a lot less. And how many theaters does that support?
The
theater side.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just something else about you're just gonna get people out of the habit. How much of this is a legacy business, and once that it's just sort of an ancient habit of going to movies, and once people break it, maybe they build lives in new directions.
I recently I told a story about when I was in Kansas City visiting my brother. It was the weekend that James Bond was released. So I have a number of kids, and I grabbed my family and maxed out the number of tickets I can buy in the movie theater. And I turned to my brother and I said, "Do you want to go to James Bond with us? Grab your kid, let's go." And he said, "Well, why would I do that? It's already right here on HBO Max." And I was thinking, wow, there you go. That's a legitimate argument. Okay, I guess we're going and you're not, right?
Well, I think it goes back to the idea that, the habit is shifted. It's just people are just used to it now. And that your brother was a perfect example of that. Like, why am I going to go to the theater when I can just watch it on? Bond was not on a service, but Halloween Dies, Kills, whatever it was. And then as was Dune.
But there's the other part of it, which is the piracy part, and
yes.
the services. When we talk about the VOD, we're acting like the studios can control whether these movies appear online or not, and that ship sailed a long time ago. They're like,
yeah.
You can go to your King of Prussia Mall there and buy a little box that looks like a very legitimate Roku box. Yeah. There's probably a dozen stores there that sell it, and you hook it up and it would be like your movie and TV app, and you come there and you can see the Eternals and Dune and everything else that's opening this weekend right there on your box, and it looks like a real professional. So the services are just kind of trying to claw back some of the money that some of the views that are already out there to some extent.
Yeah, I think it's great that you brought up the piracy, because it's not something that we've talked about. I've always meant to kind of bring it up because the issue with piracy was always you kind of had the quality that was sort of somewhat of a backstop that, people, well, I don't want to watch some shaky guy, recording it in the theater and not really getting.
It's way better than that now.
Yeah. Now it's like there's a clean copy of a movie that's in theaters that's now available to people at home, but it's also available to the pirators. And, listen, I've talked to people like, oh yeah, I saw it. And I was like, well, wait a minute, I thought you didn't have HBO Max. Oh, well, I saw it online.
So
and I'm like, I know what that means.
Yeah.
So here's my market research. I spoke to a film school class a couple weeks ago, about 40 students. And, these are people, they're studying to go into the film industry. So they're likely to be the most respectful of anyone of their age demographic of it. And I asked them, how many of you have regularly, how many of you watch pirated movies or movies there? Every hand went up, every single hand. I asked, how many of you have watched a pirated movie within the last week? Every hand in the room went up.
Really?
All of it.
Wow.
100%. So.
Well, they realize if they keep that up, there's not going to be an industry for them to go into.
Yeah. No, that's it. I mean, they've already been like, I mean, it's a huge part of what's happened to the indie sector is,
yeah.
There was a study that Moonlight, which is, as far as indie movies go, as successful a story, that it would have, that if you that's I think 5 times as many people watched it pirated as paid for it. So if just a quarter of those people had paid for it, Moonlight would have made twice as much money as it did. And just spread that out through the entire indie film ecosystem.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, it's the downstream part of this thing is so interesting because if you are breaking the habit of theatrical, which would say, the downside of watching a pirated movie is that you're missing the theatrical experience. If the industry is not keeping up with and pumping the theatrical, they're really playing more and more into that sector of a pirated movie is just as good as HBO Max. I mean, I'm just watching on my TV set anyway, right?
Mm-hmm. And they really. I mean, I've looked at these sites, and you would not know these are not official. Unless you're a real streaming tech geek, you would not know that these are not real streaming copies that you have. They have it's not the shaky cam at the theater anymore.
Yeah, the amount of young people that you need in order to keep this industry going works in such a direction that if we're really not setting up a new standard of what that might mean for us for the future, let's say future generations consuming the content in a way that that there's a long play to it, it seems more and more that we're going to move entertainment onto, platforms, video game platforms that are playing themselves out in a different way. The evolution of tech is coming so much that like what you can do with goggles on, what you can do, just with their cell phone in your pocket, there's very little need to think of like, why would I go through all the hassle of moving on to a brick and mortar situation and slow down my life that way to consume something.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about that. So movie theaters, are the only place in America that they ask people to put away their cell phones.
Weddings and funerals. Wedding, funerals, and movies.
Maybe
yeah.
I mean,
I guess you can take a photo in a wedding. I don't know if you're taking a photo of the funeral,
but I've been in churches and temples in the last year, and everybody's on their phone in them.
Yeah, and that's where you get your Bible. You read your Bible on your cell phone.
you go to a restaurant. The whole place are looking at their screens or anything. It's I'm sure everybody's dinner table. So I love that. I love as a film nerd that movies are this one sacred place. But how's that going to work? That we're
right.
Yeah, and I would ask you, Richard, because there's something we talk about quite frequently, and we've talked about this a little bit when you were here last, is sort of like the lack of any sort of leadership and revolutionary leadership and willing to break the mold a little bit. yes, Jim G left Paramount, Brian Robbins took over, but is he really going to break the mold in terms of the leadership? And we've talked a little bit about the Paramount decree going away, and is there going to be a Disney or Universal that's going to step in and reinvent the experience, or is it are we just going to sit here and cross our fingers and hope that it'll just recover? Because it seems to me the industry is just like, it's all about the product. We just got to get the product out and people will come back. That seems to be the going line that seems to be coming out of a lot of the studios, and I just think that's blinkered. I mean, maybe I'm just pessimist who worked in the industry for so long that I just
to be pessimistic.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious if you're hearing anything out there, like, is there anyone who is really trying to change the status quo out there, or is it just going to be more and more of the same, and we're just going to try to get more tentpole movies, 4-quadrant movies out there to try to coax people back into the same theater that existed prior to the pandemic?
But before before the pandemic, I know there were a couple of studios that had these pilot plans of launching little own theaters that I know one studio was planning to open like 15 of them as a test case around America to see how they would go. I don't know what's happened to those plans in the last 2 years. I haven't heard anybody mention them lately, and I haven't seen any announcements of they're going to start building. I mean, it's kind of like in politics. You look at the parties. It's like who's looking at. Is anybody looking at adding customers and growing the coalition here? Like, because in movies you're certainly losing people. So like what's the plan to bring in some new people? How do you make this more inclusive? Because we're at least 2 circuits into a death spiral here. So
at least 2 circuits aren't a spiral.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you're running out of time to try to bring in something new that pulls you out of that.
So here's a question for you. The Dune to me is an interesting case study because from an outsider who has not seen it yet, I went into it thinking only what I've heard rumor wise, which is what I read by critics who kind of said, it's a big deal, but too slow, or whatever the critics' claim was. And then I look at box office numbers and no one's going to the theaters. So those 2 things seem to represent each other. And then every person I meet that's gone to it says, it's an amazing movie, you should go see it. So I think, oh my goodness, this is one of those films that word of mouth would overrun all that kind of early BS from film critics and looking at superficial things like box office numbers to determine if it's a good film or not. I know people that have texted me the second time they've left the movie. I just saw it again. So I'm wondering, one, is marketing doing its job? But also, like, are you seeing anybody that's doing marketing in a smart way, in a clever way, that kind of gets what this new problem of word of mouth is and might have, might be a future of an evolution of marketing?
Yeah, I mean, it's also react. I mean, the Dune campaign just felt like very like traditional. It's like an old poster. It's one of those posters with a bunch of heads on them,
floating heads.
It's kind of like a recreation of a 1930s adventure film poster, and it's with kind of something that with a big worm coming out, and it's
the worm's in the middle. Can I do the worm?
I have the same the same. I mean, I haven't seen it yet because I have young kids, so the word slow, if the word slow is used in relation to a movie, That's like waving a crucifix before a vampire to me. Like that.
Well, the people I've known have seen it haven't used the word slow, but I think you're right. It might be a little long because it's a complicated story. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I can't do a complicated story right now in my life, but
well, I'll come to LA. You and I can go together. You can leave your kids behind.
Maybe we'll walk in for the last 45 minutes.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
But no, I just, I mean, I don't see anything that apart from, Marvel still manages to make these movies events that people who don't go to the movies know, okay, there's a new Marvel movie. I have to come see this. That it's time for me but I don't see anybody else that really knows how to create events and special moments out of these movies in the same way.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you bring up the Eternals because that is something that I did want to talk about because I was in the gym today and I saw a spot, and having done spots and campaigns and event movies enough, there's definitely they definitely see that there is a wear on Marvel movies starting to appear in their research, because the spot said, and this is a classic closing campaign, when you realize, well, wait a minute, maybe our tracking isn't as good as it should be. It was basically unlike any other Marvel film you've ever seen. That was the copy. That's a recognition that people are tiring of this model. They're like, world is in danger, heroes show up, heroes save the world. Like, people are just, it's not enough anymore to just say, hey, we're a Marvel movie. I mean, they were successful in phase whatever 1 through 4 because it was setting up this larger story over 12 movies and all these characters, and it all came to a fruition in the last 2 movies, which was great to see, and it built this world and this universe. But I don't feel like they've shifted gears. It's like, now we've sort of banked on the top tier heroes, so let's start going to the rest of the heroes and make stories for them too.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a larger plan here. And obviously I don't have access to it. I don't know what's going on in Kevin Feige's mind. So I can't necessarily say one way or another whether or not this is headed to another sort of big buildup. But the fact that that spot existed, it was like, they realize that there's an issue here and they're trying to get in front of it now. Because Assad's a very smart guy, and he's not going to sit by and be like, oh yeah, we'll just do what we've done in the last Marvel movie. So obviously they see something. Their research, their data is telling them something. So even if Marvel is struggling with event films now, you have to think that something has got to shift in sort of the world of marketing. I mean, we talked a lot about last week how I think Warner's really missed the mark with Dune, and they just went so hardcore sci-fi. And their trailers were beautiful and they were lovely and they're works of art, but they didn't really convince anyone to come see the movie that wasn't a hardcore Herbert fan. So it's like, it seems like it goes to the leadership issue. Is there anyone who recognizes that the old model of marketing is not working anymore, and that there needs to be an evolution in terms of trying something different? Like, it took forever for some of the studios to get away from the 30-second TV spot was the answer to fixing tracking. And that's sort of, they've moved a little bit on that, where they don't cut as many spots as they used to, but it still doesn't seem like it has moved enough. They're still doing a lot of the old tricks of like, see it in theaters, #1 movie in the world, and they just don't work anymore.
Yeah. With Marvel, it's also, it's funny because with the competition kind of going away, it kind of feels like Black Widow and Shang-Chi just came out a week ago.
Yeah, it does feel that way, right? Like, there's no context of like, it's been because also the TV shows are filling in the gap between it, right? So it's all Marvel all the time in your life.
Yeah.
Is that what it feels like? Yeah.
So it kind of makes it less of the 3 times a year when there was a Marvel movie used to be like, well, it's the next Marvel thing. What's going to happen here? It's like, but now sort of, are we still seeing Black Widow? Is Black Widow still? it doesn't feel like we're in a separate frame anymore.
Yeah. Well, they felt like standalone movies. I think that's the other issue. It's like everyone knew who was sort of wrapped into the Marvel universe that every movie that came out pretty much after Iron Man was building to something. It was building, you were introducing all these ancillary characters, and yes, Tim's right, there's shows that are sort of bringing in another piece of it, but it felt like, you know, the other two, like Black Widow and the other movie, it was sort of just like standalones. Like there wasn't, I know there was like their little Easter eggs that we're trying to set up, but it doesn't feel like they're all, it's the stage, like this is the beginning of the next phase. It just feels like they're one-off movies. And maybe that's something the marketing needs to do a better job of, sort of laying out like this is the beginning of the next phase.
Yeah.
And we're switching it up. It's a different gear now. But again, it's a superhero movie. There's not a lot of places you can go with a superhero movie. So
yeah, and I almost feel like, do I want to start over? Towards the end, it was
exactly.
hard
That's
enough keeping track of all the people anyway, and now we're going to create another. Yeah, maybe it's another generation.
And they've already done the storyline where the heroes actually lose. So it's like, where else do you go?
Well, I mean, the defenders of it, the producers say that now superhero movies are just superhero movies are just movies. So it's like there'll be romantic movies. There'll be, the Nicholas Sparks version of a superhero movie. There'll be superhero movies for toddlers. There'll be, I don't know if we're right there yet. But I mean, on some level, I do sort of admire that. Like, if this was say Sony, we'd just be getting Iron Man 7 right now, and that would be they'd just be taking what had already worked and just putting bigger numbers on it and just pounding this out until there's not a single person that wants to see it anymore. So
right,
at least they're taking some risk there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how the studios are really going to have to understand what the viewing audience wants now. And then again, like going back to some of the issues we have in marketing is, if word of mouth is being affected, which I always think word of mouth is the greatest ROI you get, because I'm going to go see Dune because someone told me to go do it, right? If I didn't have someone telling me, it would have just passed by. How do we play into that world now? The whole like Facebook, Instagram marketing scheme where whatever it is those platforms wanted to do, where they became viral hits and get some kind of movement there. I don't think that's happening. There's way too much noise on those platforms to just get the next 15-second hit of some video on TikTok. I don't think you're going to be able to push me into a movie theater 3 or 4 hours from now where I have to commit another 3 hours to watching something where if I'm in that stream, it's not going to pull itself out. So there's a real challenge here to actually define what is our community going to be from now on. Is there going to be a theater going community? Will there be studios to support that kind of theater going community? And will there be creators that understand and still want to develop content in that community? Those are the three big questions, and someone's going to have to figure something out or step up and start making some changes.
So if you just do the ox and razor on that, and just look at the, what's the simplest answer to that? It's pretty clear. If you got all those propositions you put, if you have to give a yes or no answer, like
right.
No.
Is there going to be a theater going? You mean those like ask the questions just yes or no?
Yeah. Is it like, if they're not rhetorical questions, but yes or no? Right? Is there going to be a theater going community? No.
No. Right.
Will there be theaters? No. So
will there be content creators that still want to will still develop something? And that no, right? Because if you don't have the market, then you don't develop, even no matter what your heart's desires. But then I could say something like, will there be content makers? Yes. Will they do creative work? Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. And I've spoken to a number of agents and producers who who will tell you that this is the golden age of entertainment right now. That there's more things being filmed, more different kinds of stories, people taking chances on, more.
It's amazing.
Across genres, across diversities, across more people getting a chance to make their movies, more people working. That and if you're just talking in sheer tonnage, there's how many studios now? 7, 8 studios that are $1 billion plus in spending in budget, and then you have you have like Roku comes and announced they're going to spend $1 billion. So Roku is now a bigger studio than anybody was 5 years ago. But it's not going to look like what we thought of as the movie world.
But it is
I wonder,
right? I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I wonder if, though, to your point, I mean, yes, there are a lot of more content creators and more willingness to tell different stories, but are we in the sort of land of what John Landgraf likes to say, quote unquote, peak TV, where there's just too much to the point where it's almost so much that nothing gets noticed? So yeah, it's great that all these stories are being told, but if only 3 people watch it, that story like that's never going to get told again. Like, take a look at the Netflix model, where they basically make so much, and Tim would dispute whether or not any of it's actually any good.
That's one of my beefs. How bad it is.
So, and it's just like, and they just throw it out there, and then in the next week they're on to the next. Like Red Notice just came out today. It's getting pilfered into reviews. Like it's just a movie that's just bleh. And it's got probably 3 of the most charismatic actors working today, and you've got a garbage story, and it's just at a certain point
it's got to be $200 million spent on that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Netflix, of course, will come out on Monday and said it's the most watched movie in the world, because that's just the Netflix model. And it's like, but at a certain point is quality. See, this is what I worry about. I worry that the quantity is now superseding the quality, to the point where it's so mishmash. We don't even know what stories deserve to be told on the screen anymore. We don't know what's good, what's bad. It's just, there's so much out there. Like, I like the fact that people are taking risks. That's great. But they're taking risks, and then the things that should be like invested in, like, we need to find a way to make this relevant and get this out there, are just sort of put on a platform and with a little tile, and then, okay, what's next? That's
there's no metrics to judge it either.
You're right. Exactly. That's the other thing.
We don't know what box office means anymore, because and on streaming it's just random, like 44% of subscribers watch this for 3 minutes or less. It's like,
and I think the only person who has really sort of shown any sense of like figuring out the metrics is the entertainment strategy guy, who you've had on your newsletter every now and then. I'm jealous you've probably actually spoken to him, which bully for you that you actually know who he is. But it's fascinating to me that they're starting to move a little bit and realizing that they can't necessarily rely on their metrics anymore, like the 2 minutes constitute a view, which is what Netflix is. I mean, we all talked ad nauseum about those slides that came out when they presented, and everyone was like obsessing about them when it was basically information we already knew.
Yeah, sure.
Entertainment strategy guy will tell you, actually, in his opinion, I think he's written this. Hope I'm not giving away his opinion here, but so Netflix announced that they're going to give out more information and more
right.
and it seemed like again, what he pointed out is that it's not that they're giving out more information, they're giving out different information. And what that does, he says, for him and for all the people who were building data sets, so they were beginning to be able to judge, to make some comments and get some context on the Netflix announcements, is it wipes it all out and sends them all back to zero.
Right.
He thinks that they realized people were getting too close to being able to actually interpret whether things were doing well or not.
Yeah.
And that by putting out these different numbers, it wipes everyone out. It'll be another year and a half before they
figure out what the numbers are. Although there was a press release recently that said Squid Game had generated $900 million for Netflix, with $4.5 million new viewers. So the way I did the math to get to that number was 4.5 times $17 a month. So $17 times a year, 12 months times 4 million, you get to 900 million. And you're like, okay, if that's how the math kind of works, where you realize it's not about that one show, but I get 12 months of subscription from a new person on the platform, you can get to $1 billion pretty fast with a pretty low investment.
But how many, but if you can do a Squid Game every month, and if it doesn't take 500, right? But if it does, how many shows does it take to get you to a Squid Game? And how many, and the other part of this is when you're doing that many shows, and they weren't planning that Squid Game was going to be their hit for the year. It was like Squid Game was one of 100 things that came out that Thursday. And then 2 weeks later, like, hey, look, we got a hit here. How about that? And the problem with that is you can't do any merchandising. They're talking a lot about their video game division and their and all their merchandising, but you can't, So I know that for James Cameron's new Avatar movie, they were taking pitches from toy companies 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So when that movie comes out, the toy companies will have been working on that for 5 years. That have that and they were showing, toy companies were seeing pieces of the movie and doing all that, and that Disney puts out 10 movies a year, and the product line is underway. You can't say hey, we got a hit. We need to get some stuff to Target by the end of by Friday. That's
maybe that's the future with it, though. You never know.
And Amazon meets Netflix, and you get
yeah, right.
Yeah, but particularly as big a hit as Squid Game is, I guarantee 6 weeks from now nobody's going to be talking about Squid Game.
Sure.
It will be. It'll be wiped out.
Yeah, the content glut really is. It's the term we use is the what to watch problem, but it's a content glut of there just is way too much, and it feels like the universe can't retain that idea of is Black Widow still in the theater? I mean, I saw the guy next to me on the plane yesterday was watching Black Widow, and I'm thinking, which I thought, what a waste of 2 hours to watch Black Widow again. But I was thinking maybe he's never seen Black Widow. Right, but to me, someone's still consuming it, and for the rest of us, isn't Scarlett Johansson's already in a lawsuit with that? We're way past the viewing time to be watching that movie.
I mean, Dune feels like it came out.
I thought so too. I was honest. There was a weird part when it finally was released. I was like, wait, it wasn't released. I remember watching the marketing for it a year ago. But I think that's what threw us off is it's probably one of those films that marketing came out a year ago. The movie reviews came out soon after the trailers were coming out. And then the movie came out 7 months later.
I wonder if you can still, the way a movie release works, that you spend years slowly building this and announcements and pictures from the sets and all that and then a month and a half out, you have the big magazine article. I mean, can anyone, is anyone remembering that or keeping track of that anymore? Does that build any momentum in the?
Yeah, that's something that you and Keith should solve through your consulting services, Vision Craft.
Yeah, right.
But it is something your audience is probably asking that question of wait a second, how far does this break? And we all know that we're not living out 2 years ago. So what should change? And One of them might be like, well, let's discuss how a movie rollout works.
Yeah. If any studio is listening wants to pay me to come in and say, I don't know, it looks to me like you guys are screwed. I'm happy to set that up. So,
but they can also just get that in your weekly newsletter, right?
They love hearing that. They love hearing that they're screwed because they just love all the negativity. They love it.
Yeah,
they live for it. They love being criticized too.
Absolutely, very, very open to.
Yes, exactly.
But that's what your newsletter, the subscription newsletter is. That's what you're doing. You're telling them they're screwed, so they already get that from you. We have to create a new level of engagement so you can be the face-to-face until
I was trying for the first couple of years I tried to do an annual sort of happy issue where I said good things, but I gave up on
that. So good for you, Richard. The club.
I couldn't find enough content in 12 months of Hollywood coverage to giving a
happy perspective.
Well, some of what, some of just doing the podcast with folks, I try to think through, do we come across too negative all the time? Like we know it's broken. That's why we called the podcast Hollywood Breaks. That one's very easy. We got that one nailed. And to not beat the same drum every week there, you have to understand, like, there's also the ability to break through. So breaking into Hollywood is also part of our name. And you say, well, no, these are real issues. Don't have that problem. But there are solutions also. I mean, there will be a solution. Right. Hollywood's not going anywhere. And kind of to your point earlier, Richard, like it's in its golden day. Like Hollywood is booming in a way. There's more content being produced with more outlets and more diversification than ever before. That's to its credit. That's amazing. We're just basically talking distribution usually in our talk, not really talking about what's happening. But there's some great stuff.
I mean, and if you're just looking at like what's getting made, it looks good. The problem is it's just that what we're all doing is like how does this turn into something stable, something durable? It's like there's certainly a lot of stuff happening, and you could say like, well, if it just continued like this forever, then yeah, maybe that would be great. It'd be different, but maybe it would be great. But it's sort of this disbelief that I mean, Netflix is not a money making business. It's a money losing business at the bottom of all this. So that can't go on forever. So what happens after that is the question.
Or where else does it? Because it obviously creates influence. So where else is that influence felt that it's worth burning money in one area to make it somewhere else, right?
Yeah, the optimists, the agents I talked to, they said, the analyst just said, so if Netflix goes away, something else will come along. Somebody else will get into it. There's billions of dollars out there. People are going to want it.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't root for people, do we? We're like, well, screw them. Another person will just fill in the blank, and then we don't even care. Like Netflix,
who cares? Who's next?
Away. Yeah,
exactly. But more to the point, if Paramount Plus goes away, like, is that the end of the world? If Paramount gets absorbed, if Paramount Plus goes away,
it's not the end of the world.
No.
We at Peacock, we don't even know if Peacock's going to make it to the end of the year.
We're not going to make any money.
It's already called Comcast. We already know what Peacock is, and people already received that through an antiquated box. Why are we doing this again?
Exactly.
Yeah, so crazy. Well, Richard, you're amazing. Everyone, please give Richard some regard and some heads out there. Richard is the editor-in-chief of The Ankler magazine he created, and the Hollywood's most fearsome newsletter. So you got to keep the fearsomeness coming. I always like the honest truth from you. It's great to have you.
I'm going to try to be positive. Now I'm going to leave trying to be positive and find nice things to say. So I might ruin it.
We have to change it to Hollywood's most fearsome newsletter to Hollywood's most fearsome and lovable newsletter.
And cuddly.
Don't go changing for us, Richard, please.
Yeah,
we like the edge.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's always fun to talk with you guys. Thanks so much.
Yeah, we appreciate you.